The great outdoors. It can definitely be great and also very outdoorsy. Today's picks in the Best in Horror Countdown 2023 through 2024 are vastly different from one another, but one thing that ties both of them together are that their stories take place where the safety of civilization is far, far away. Time for a controversial pick. Horror fandom seems to be split down the middle as to whether this is an imaginative new take on the stale slasher genre or an art house time waster. I recognize both opinions, but still, it was one of my favorites of the year. At number 9 is In a Violent Nature. It was released on May 31st, 2024, and it's streaming on Shudder from IFC Films. It's directed and written by Nash. When a group of campers inadvertently disturb the resting place of a long-dead killer, the murderer, who has been the subject of many a campfire tale in the community, rises and seeks revenge on those who wronged him. If this premise seems familiar, it's intentional. It's the plot of many a slasher movie, most similar to Friday the 13th, the difference being that In a Violent Nature tells this tale from the perspective of the killer from the beginning to almost the end. While the slasher films of old have been accused of emulating the killer, this one literally hitches a ride on the back of the killer, forcing you to experience a typical Friday the 13th story from Jason's perspective, the victims playing only minor roles in the killer's path. Now, while this idea might seem like a good one on paper, I have to admit that seeing the story play out from the perspective of the killer is both intriguing, but occasionally quite tedious, if I'm being honest. There are long, and I mean long, portions of this film where we simply follow a few steps behind the killer as he meanders through the dense forest in a direct path towards his victims. Still, they keep it interesting. Early on, there's a wonderful scene where the killer is walking towards a road. A group of rowdy kids race by, screaming loudly and playing loud music, and the killer reacts without emotion, simply changing direction to follow the campers once he becomes aware of them. While Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees have been compared to a great white shark, always hunting and being drawn to blood from miles away, the killer in a Violent Nature moves in the same direct and unstoppable manner. Still, mileage is going to vary here. Each of these long stints of following the killer end in something that's going to cause a gasp or a laugh, and probably both, but I know some will lack the patience to get to it. But if you are patient, you're going to experience some of the most brutal and satisfying kills ever caught on film. While all of them are brutal and gory, one of the kills will go down in history as probably the gnarliest I have ever encountered. It garnered a round of applause from the audience I saw it with, and the applause was well-deserved indeed. Ry Barrett has basically sealed his casting as Jason if and when a new Friday the 13th movie is made. While we only see a few shots of his face, Barrett channels his inner Kane Hodder by using his body and actions to communicate the rage this character contains within. And just when you thought it would be difficult to come up with new ways to kill people, writer-director Nash delivers new and inventive ways to disassemble the human body. All of them are completely different and utterly ruthless. Nash, Barrett, and everyone behind In a Violent Nature seem to be uber fans of the Friday the 13th films. Most of the tropes are there, but the movies never venture into the realm of parody. Everything is taken seriously, and while there are quite a few moments of intentional laughter, the movie never fails to remind you that death is a horrifying experience here as the killer chops, hacks, smashes, and pounds his way through these unfortunate souls. While basically this is every silent slasher from Michael to Jason to Cropsy, In a Violent Nature stands out on its own by giving the killer his own relentless and tragic backstory, motivation for killing, rules of how the evil within him works and can be resurrected, and of course, how he can be stopped. Sure, it all feels familiar because it's an amalgamation of many a slasher film of old, but because this film seems to laud those movies so much, it's all taken seriously and thus feels new and fresh. and no killer is complete without his own distinct mask. This one dons an old fireman's mask, which I feel is the only critique I have about the design of the killer, as I feel the mask really isn't that scary, and the big screened-over eyes on the hood make him almost look goofy. Luckily, when the killer is in action, the mask didn't really distract me because the kills are so good, as well as the fact that most of the film shows the killer from behind anyway. Director of photography Pierce Dirks has a background in nature photography, which is why the scenery around this heinous murder spree looks so gorgeous. The talented camera work captures the greens, blues, and darks, making the nature of In a Violent Nature gorgeous as well as extremely violent. The darks hiding dark secrets and hidden dangers, while the colors are there to deceive you into a false sense of security. Still, this film is almost an ambient experience more than a slasher film. There are long scenes with no dialogue, and when there is dialogue, it's muffled and in the background because, again, this is the film from the killer's perspective, and who is sleeping with who and who has a beef with who is not really important to the killer. It definitely drives the point home that while the life of the killer seems exciting, much like any other profession, there are long periods of silence and boredom. A lot of thought has been put into In a Violent Nature, as there seems to be a whole other movie being filmed from a different perspective, but that movie is the one that we've seen many times. It's the fact that we're seeing it from the killer's perspective that makes it all so different. The sense of danger still is ever present as the killer lurks in the darkness somewhere. This point is made abundantly clear in the final moments, where the threat of the killer hangs like a dense fog around those who encounter this undead monster. I highly recommend you check out In a Violent Nature, but don't forget your patience. This feels like a slasher film for those who are able to reflect upon oneself and appreciate the wait between kills. The payoff is absolutely amazing once the kills do occur. One can only hope that the critical and hopefully financial success of In a Violent Nature can spark a new resurgence of slasher films and maybe give a much-needed kick in the ass to those idiots who are dragging ass on the Friday the 13th property, and get them to bring Jason back. Until then, deftly made films like In a Violent Nature, honoring the rich and still potent tradition of slasher cinema, are doing a hell of a job without them. In the vast forests of America's Hat, also known as Canada, a harrowing tale of survival was told this year about a man and his war against hundreds of beavers. I know it's not horror, but it's still something I think my viewers will appreciate, so I'm mentioning it here. Hundreds of Beavers was released on April 15th, 2024, and is streaming on Tubi from Lightbulb Film Distribution. It's directed by Mike Cheslik and written by Mike Cheslik and Ryland, Brickson, Tews. It's the 19th century in the Great Canadian Wilderness, and everything was going hunky-dory for simple cider farmer Jean Kayak, played by Ryan Brickson Tews, until disaster struck and his cider distillery was destroyed by the local wildlife. This unfortunate event leaves Jean Kayak alone in his skivvies and hungry for the cold winter months. Through a long series of trial and error, mostly error, Jean Kayak learns how to live off the land and trap animals in order to survive. But once Jean Kayak catches the eye of the daughter of a fur trader, he learns in order to win her hand, he must infiltrate the beaver stronghold and capture the furs of hundreds of beavers. Kind of like the name of the movie. Hundreds of Beavers is a black and white slapstick comedy that uses plenty of goofy sound effects, but never utters a single word. For the duration of the film, director Mike Cheslik tells this tale of harrowing wilderness survival through action alone, and it's absolutely brilliant from beginning to end. Cheslik is one of the warped minds behind the Lake Michigan Monster, which utilized a lot of the same comical elements as Hundreds of Beavers. But with this new film, Cheslik and his co-writer/star Ryland Brickson Tews are able to make movie magic like few dare to do, bringing to life a story comprised of equal parts Three Stooges, Buster Keaton, and Tex Avery. Now, I understand the era I'm in. A while back, I tried to show my niece and nephew a Three Stooges short, and they had absolutely no interest in it. A lot of modern audiences are extremely literal, and more importantly, lack a sense of humor that is A, self-aware enough to be self-depreciating, B, confident enough about the world around them to be nonsensical, and 4, comfortable enough to laugh at the dumb stuff. Now, in order to appreciate Hundreds of Beavers, you must be able to embrace the odd, the eccentric, and the absurd. It's the kind of person who can watch an almost 2-hour movie featuring all of its animals running around in mascot and furry outfits. We're seeing a guy getting attacked by a woodpecker every time he whistles, and he does so often in this movie, causes compounding laughter. If that's you, then awesome. This is a movie for you. But for the most part, Hundreds of Beavers could have been released during the silent era and fit in perfectly. Aside from one scene where the lead gal dances on a stripper pole in her undies and a garter belt, there's nothing in this film that wouldn't make it okay for all ages, though modern kids might find it all dated and lame. But if you're a kid at heart who grew up with those slapstick episodes of The Three Stooges, Laurel and Hardy, and Little Rascals, and cartoons by Tex Avery, Rube Goldberg, and Mel Blanc, then you're bound to recognize the skill and talents Cheslik and Tews put into this film. And you can learn something from Hundreds of Beavers, too. This film serves as an intro course in economics, business, and finance, as Jean Kayak must learn to negotiate with the fur trapper in order to work his way up in wealth by turning furs into gold, then using gold to get the tools to make his job of getting more furs easier. The film walks the viewer through the many defeats and minor victories Jean Kayak experiences as he learns this system, puts it to use in order to get what he wants, and soon becomes such a master that he wins the hand of the fur trader's hot goth daughter. So it's not just a time waster, you get a remedial course in econ as an added bonus. I love to laugh almost as much as I love the macabre, and Hundreds of Beavers made me downright giddy with excitement, not only to watch it, but by being able to share it with someone who needs a laugh. They just don't make them like this anymore, so enjoy Hundreds of Beavers for the precious gem that it is. To justify this being on my horror countdown, Hundreds of Beavers does have many, many deaths of animals, but not real animals. They're actually just people wearing furry mascot animal costumes. And it has its own gore in a Tom and Jerry sort of way. So there you go. In a very broad sense, this can be seen as a little bit of a horror comedy. Cheslik and Tews have put together a wonderful little film here, overflowing with the kind of creativity that you don't often find in modern cinema. Tews' gift for physical comedy is gold, and it looks as if he really spent quite a lot of time in the snow with barely a stitch of clothing on, so his dedication to the role is commendable. It's a joyous throwback to a simpler time in cinema, and if you're a fan of that off-kilter style of humor, you're bound to match the number of beavers in this film with your own laughter. I highly recommend Hundreds of Beavers for that rascally kid in all of us. Once again and always, feel free to agree, disagree, or how about you play along at home and give me your own picks for your favorite horror movies. It's October, so let's talk horror. Come back tomorrow for the next level in the Best in Horror Countdown. Be sure to hit all of those pertinent bells and whistles down below, and you'll never miss a post. Happy Halloween, folks. Please do me a favor and punch that like button down below. Share this video with all of your social media addicted pals. Click subscribe to this channel and ring that bell for notifications. You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be, stuck inside your reality. You're doomed. Oh, you're doomed. You're doomed. Live the life that you are meant to be. To live inside that